Hi guys. I am a mutant. I was a mutant software developer because I'm an extrovert, and I'm a mutant project management consultant because most of you are probably not going to be able to nap over the next 75 minutes. What I want to do is talk with you about risk management, but first I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I worry a little bit whenever I stand up and say I'm a risk management expert. Particularly in some, you get in a crowd that has Tim Lister in it, you got to worry about saying stuff like that. Let's just say risk management has been an important part of my life. I've got about 100 parachute jumps. I've successfully worked with explosives and have all of my, I have all my fingers. There's 5 here and 5 here. I have all my fingers. Raised 3 teenagers. I do have all my fingers. Raised 3 teenagers to adulthood. And I've been married 3 times. So if I'm not a risk management expert, I'm certainly an adventurer. And what I want to do is talk with you today a little bit about risk management process in particular. But if you're a process geek, what you'll find is a disappointing commonality for any process improvement project that you might try. Specifically, I want to talk about risk management processes and why is it so difficult to implement good risk management processes in an organization. And once they're implemented, why don't they stick? I was chatting with a number of friends who work in the field, and we observed something. You know, it's not that consultants are terribly clever. In fact, many of my clients would tell you I'm not terribly clever. What happens is, if you imagine that you work on large projects, 3-year projects, 5-year projects, the first one doesn't count. First one doesn't count. You were like putting paper in the printer and learning your job. By the second or third, you start getting a sense of the larger project. You're now 15 years into your career. At the end of your 30-year career, you could have worked on 5 of those. I've worked on probably 50 or 60 projects. I'm talking about larger projects, north of $10 million. And I don't have to be terribly clever. What happens is kind of like a bumblebee doesn't have to be a botanist to pollinate flowers. I'll wander in and, you don't want a consultant first day. They're no smarter than you. They're just getting paid more. And I'm walking around and I'm looking at patterns. And then when I go to the next project, I get a chance to apply those patterns. And I will seem terribly clever because I can tell you, not violating confidentiality, hey, I saw some other guys who did this way and it seemed to be more effective than what you're doing. Why don't you try that? And if it works, I've solved my problem. I'm cross-pollinating ideas. And so I was chatting with a bunch of consultants and we were talking about something we'd seen in organizations that were trying to be more consistent. They were trying to improve their risk management game. And typically what happens is they start and risk processes are non-existent. It's maybe a little guerrilla warfare going on, a little quiet, secret stuff going on, but the risk management processes are non-existent. And what will happen is a little more experienced team leader or project manager shows up and they don't much care what the local practice is. They look around and see local practice isn't doing this, but they've had some successes. And because they've had successes with risk management, they try it just kind of quietly off in a corner. And risk management is not about magic. It's about trying to identify what could go wrong and driving defensively. And a certain amount of risk management will generally serve you. And so what happens is, in little patches, people who have had bad experiences will improve their risk management processes, but it's sporadic. It's not organized. It's not part of the culture. And I'll wander away and I'll come back and visit the client again, and it's gratifying. What you see is some of the good ideas take root. And you'll see this risk management processes. You'll see this with a variety of different processes and methods in an organization. And it just makes you happy. You know that you're not responsible for this, but you coached them and helped them a little bit. You want to share and bask in some of the glory. And then you come back a few years later, and it's turned into a box-checking exercise. The process is happening for process sake. Why are we doing this report? Because our mandatory process says we do this report and file it in that filing cabinet. That's why we're doing this. And then you come back and you discover we're down to pretty much non-existent process. And I've seen this process over and over again. And I was chatting with some guys. It's like, wait a minute. How is it that we want to take credit and bask in the glory when people peak, and then we see them kind of backslide and it's failing? What's really going on? And we were talking about this and realized there's a puzzle. Here's some puzzles about risk management. Is it really just beyond our capacity? Can only the smart guys do risk management, and then when they leave or get promoted, we are now too stupid to do risk management? Is it just, maybe the systems we're building are getting so complex that we just can't really get our heads wrapped around them? Or maybe risk management is just hard. It's just hard and we get kind of worn down and we backslide. Or maybe there is a secret ninja force that is dedicated to the destruction of our projects, and they're working counter to all of your risk management efforts. They're the guys that when you invite them to meetings, oh, another meeting. This will never work. We can't identify all the risks. So we have to say, what are the opposing forces? Who's in the pro, we want to take more risk. We want to have more surprises on our project. Who are those folks? And fundamentally, the gist of this talk is I want to explore all of these and get to answer the question, can we stabilize and improve incrementally our risk management processes? And if you're not a risk management geek, what you'll find is there's only a couple of slides in here that are specific to risk management. In a larger sense, can we stabilize our process improvement efforts? Or are we doomed to be on this, Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill and getting crushed by it on the way down and having to push the boulder back up the hill? So that's what I want to do. I want to talk about this stuff. And I think I've got a couple of clever ideas at the end. They're not terribly clever. It's stuff you'll all recognize, but I'll try to give you a booster shot for some stuff you already know. But I think if you understand the problem a little better, maybe we can be a little more effective. What I want to do first is ask, is risk management really just beyond our capacity as mortal humans? Now, have the math geeks and the theoreticians just evolved to such a place that they say, well, this is best practice, but you can't do it, right? So I want to talk about a couple of things. Statistics and a couple of psychological factors called framing bias and availability bias. First, are people really that bad at statistics? Come on. We're in Las Vegas. Yes, people are really that bad at statistics. The piece of statistics, the piece of math that people don't get intuitively is compounded, right? We're doing exponential decay, where we're multiplying a bunch of junk together. Here's where humans fail in terms of getting their brains wrapped around risk. If I tell you something is likely to happen 1 in 1,000 times, or 3 in 1,000 times, your skinny brain collapses that probability to 0. That doesn't mean you're foolish. That's how your brain works. If you get a bunch of math geeks in a room, they'll make the same mistake. It's counterintuitive. I'd like you to imagine for a moment a happy young math geek and analyst at Lehman Brothers or AIG going to the board and saying, I've got a great idea for an investment. We've done these massive calculations. They're assumptions, and it's partly dreams and partly guesswork, and some of it's math. We've done these computations, and we think this model is going to be extremely profitable 99.9% of the weeks where we do business this way. 99.9% of the weeks. That would rock, wouldn't it? 99.9% of the weeks, we're going to make a huge profit. Sold. Do it. We're happy. Over a 5-year period, if something is 99.9% of the time going to be profitable in a given week, over a 5-year period, 20% of the time, it fails to be profitable. I worry no one asked, what's the downside here? By the way, if 99.7% of the time that model is profitable, it fails. There's a 50% chance of failure in a 5-year period. You're not foolish. I had to look it up and do the math and check it. It doesn't look right. But yeah, that's how it works. And just intuitively, we don't grasp that. Are people really that bad at statistics? Yeah, there's a piece of this that can be a real challenge. Another challenge we have when we try to understand risk is something called availability bias. There's a book published about 2 years ago called Predictably Irrational. Great book. If you want to get tricked, you read this book and say, oh, yeah, that's obviously, wrong. there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. One of them is about availability bias. And availability bias is something that psychologists tell us about how likely something is, how likely we think something is going to be, or how likely we think something is going to occur, is a result of how readily we can call an example to mind. So if we can think of an example, if we can bring an example to mind very readily, we'll think it's more likely. And if we can't, we'll think it's less likely. Let me give an example. How many people in this room have lost a hard drive in the last year? How many lost a hard drive in the last year? It's just a few of you. You know, the rest of the people in this room could show you statistics that say it's mathematically very unlikely you'd lose that hard drive. Mean time between failures up to 250,000 hours. I mean, I think you're probably making it up. No, he's not making it up. So if we talk about what's the likelihood of losing a hard drive, these guys, I'm guessing the people who have lost a hard drive lately, a little more religious than the rest of you about backups. To them, it's a clear and present danger. If you haven't lost a hard drive in the last 10 years, it's easy to get sloppy about backups. This is the mission patch for STS-107, Columbia. Columbia Space Shuttle crashed in February of 2003? February 1st, 2003. What broke Columbia was a foam shredding problem. You may have heard about this. There's pipes and such that run to provide liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen to the fuel tanks, and they're insulated. They're insulated with, for our purposes, just some hunks of foam. And it turns out hunks of foam traveling 1,000 or 2,000 miles an hour can do damage to the leading edge of the wing. It turns out every space shuttle flight since the start of the program had experienced damage to the leading edge of the wing from the foam. When the first shuttle came back, they reviewed the pictures and they saw the leading edge of the wing. The engineers all got into a room and said, this is a flight risk. That means this could break the airplane. This is an extremely high impact risk. If you violate the structural integrity of the wing and let the hot gases into the wing, the space shuttle would disintegrate on entry. And it was talked about in a bunch of meetings, and they had Tiger teams trying to come up with different solutions. And they tried a variety of different solutions, none of which solved the problem. Every space shuttle since the start of the program had had the front edge of the wing damaged by foam. So what happened over time is kind of understandable. A lot of the failures of risk management are kind of understandable if you give people permission to be human. And what the accident investigation report said was, with each successful landing, it appears that NASA engineers and managers regarded this foam shredding problem as inevitable. And because it hadn't crashed the airplane, it must be an acceptable risk. I mean, we've done it dozens of times and it hasn't crashed the airplane. We've drilled dozens and dozens of wells in the Gulf of Mexico. What could go wrong? We're old hands at this. It's technology we completely understand. We've done this before. What could go wrong? That's how availability bias works. An example of this would be if I pulled out a revolver, put one bullet in the chamber, pointed at my temple, pulled the trigger, and after 5 or 6 rounds asserted to you, this must be safe because I'm not dead yet. No. What happens when the probabilities are small is each time is a roll of the dice, and eventually bad things can happen. Availability bias doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve us for low probability events because if it hasn't happened in our lifetime, it's easy to forget. Talk with your grandparents about the Great Depression. Remember all the people who were talking in the 80s and 90s about, no, you should save, and no, you don't want to be this leveraged because we remember the Great Depression. And remember you young bucks who were saying, oh, Grandma, you don't understand. The financial system is much more stable than that now. Here's another example of availability bias. A science experiment. I took the causes of death in the United States from 2006. I would like you to just, in your mind or in the margins of your coloring book, sort this list. What do you suppose is the most prevalent cause of death? Least? What goes in the middle? I'll give you just a second to sort that. Just give it your best guess. Okay, here's the answers. Turns out heart disease and cancer, that's really boring. That's really boring. You know, I can imagine these people eating pork rinds and drinking buttermilk while they worry about a stranger breaking into their house to shoot them. You know, an even better example of availability bias, I used this talk as actually a chance to do some more research. How many ever saw the movie Terminator 3? Remember Terminator 3 with the silvery guy and they had the big finish at the end? All right. In the United States, there are 800,000 law enforcement officers. There are 800,000 law enforcement officers. 2008 was the year I could get statistics. How many law enforcement officers do you imagine die in the line of duty through the intentional acts of someone else? So traffic accident wouldn't count. Die because of the intentional acts of someone else in the line of duty in a given year. There's 800,000 officers. How many do you suppose? Just yell it out. Give me a guess. 6,000 is a little high. Try 1,000, little high. 80, little high. No, it's about 50 or 60. 50 or 60. Do you know if you watch 1 week of primetime television, I will cover even money bets that say you see more than 50 officers killed in 1 week of primetime television, particularly all these cop shows we have on. Now, my brother-in-law is a cop. I'm not making light of this event, this violence. I mean, that's terrible. But it's actually a very small proportion. But 6,000 is not a foolish answer if you don't have access to statistics. In fact, if you extrapolate from what you... At the end of Terminator, they killed 2 years' worth. Right? If you extrapolate from what you see, that's availability bias the other way. If I can call an example to mind, it must be likely. It's like when you see people I imagine most of you flew here. You see those white-knuckle flyers? I was on a flight a few weeks ago. They had this young lady, and she was saying, "This is my very first flight. I'm really worried." You know, statistics say you're more likely to die in a traffic accident on the way to the airport than you are in a cross-country trip. But availability bias. If an airplane crashes, it's front page of the news. Everybody's all excited. If a car crashes, the guy on the radio says, "Oh, take an alternate route." Another problem we have, just in kind of getting our head wrapped around this, is framing bias. This is just a little game, relax. There's no wrong answers. And by the way, this is hypothetical. I'm not really going to pay on this game. But imagine you could play on this game. You're forced to choose one option. Just for you, you can only play the game one time. Either you have an 80% chance of winning $4,000 and a 20% chance of getting nothing. Or 100% of the time, you get $3,000. How many of you want to play game A? Quick show of hands. A couple of you. How about B? Oh, okay. What about game 2? I might play this one. See me in the lobby if you want to play this game. Game A, you have an 80% chance of losing $4,000. And a 20% chance of losing nothing. Or, just give me $3,000 and you're off the hook. Which of these two? If you had to play one of these two games, which of these would you want to play? How many want to play game A? Quick show of hands. More of you. Game B? A couple. All right, well, there's this guy named Adam Smith who wrote a book about economics a couple hundred years ago, and he didn't agree with you. He said, no, humans are rational actors. Humans are rational actors. And the expected value of game A is that you lose $3,200. The expected value of game B is that you lose $3,000. See me after for the statistics tutorial that covers this. Mathematically, if we were rational actors, we would choose B here and A here, if you're rational actors. This is a place where your intuition isn't serving you. Question? No, stretching, okay. Here's what the cognitive psychologists have figured out about humans. We aren't risk averse, we're loss averse. We will take a small, sure thing over a risky, better thing. In general, there's exceptions. Your mileage will vary, void where taxed or prohibited. We will, however, take a lot of risk to avoid a loss. This is important. You know, I was in a talk, Johanna Rothman gave a talk just before lunch, and she was saying, you know, the people pushing, trying to hit dates. I'm going to stand up here and contradict Tim and everybody else. You need to recognize there is a desire. If there's a business impact to not hitting a date, it's not irrational to say, I want to hit the date. The question is, do people understand how much risk they're taking when they start piling things on? Do you understand how much risk you're taking when you work overtime? Do you understand the quality implications of going to afterburners? And what you have to realize is you've got to be very careful about how you frame this, because if you just frame it to an executive, says, you know, this is going to incur a lot of risk, and they're looking at the loss, it's really easy for them to, because of framing bias, to say, well, yeah, well, we have to take some risks to get jobs done. And this is, I think, something that makes risk management a challenge. So what are some of the other challenges to risk management? Infinite risks, correlated risks, the fact that risk management isn't sexy, although I'm trying to redefine the discipline myself. Subjective probability of future events, and cultural norms. So first thing I want to talk about is infinite risks. I want you to imagine you get all the liars in one room. You get the right people in a room to talk about risk management. You get smart people, people with experience in the knowledge domain, people who've worked on similar projects in the past. And you start brainstorming. And most teams, when they talk about history, when you don't make it nebulous, you say, tell me about things that have happened in the past that did violence to you that we might want to talk about in terms of risk, they can come up with a short list pretty quick. And then there's usually a little pause, and people will come up with a couple of other ideas, which is cool. Now we can expand our circle of risk management to encompass that, and then someone else comes up with a couple of ideas, and we have to expand our circle again. And then you start coming up with other ideas, some of them silly, some of them real. And some of the people in the room, the concrete thinkers, that's not a pejorative term. Some people are very concrete, some people are kind of squishy, and there's value in both. But the concrete thinkers get really frustrated as this is going on. Because they're going to say, look, we could sit in this room forever. We could come up with an infinite list. Aliens might land in North America and disrupt our project. Aliens might land in South America. Aliens could land in Hawaii and disrupt our... It's an infinite list. And as a practical matter, yeah, there's an infinite list of risks, but there's not an infinite list of stuff we care about. But that's a challenge to try to help people understand that, no, there's going to be black, white, and a shade of gray, and we don't need to go way out into the silly stuff. If the Earth is taken over by aliens, you all have a get-out-of-jail-free card from me on your projects. How's that? Correlated risks. Correlated risks. Another thing people just... we're talking about challenges that make people say, just do it. You ever heard that line? Just do it. Nike's really happy about it, but I think there's a lot of software engineers that really wish that that line had never come up. When I was 17, I went over the handlebars of a motorcycle at 60 miles an hour. I was wearing a really good helmet that was destroyed. I was wearing a flimsy ski jacket that was destroyed. I was wearing flimsy gloves that were destroyed. I was wearing pants that were thinner than this and shoes that, these are leather. My shoes at the time were plastic. I was in the fortunate position that I didn't hit anything except the pavement. And I shot down the pavement for this interesting thing. If you wreck a motorcycle and don't hit anything, you're just doing 60 without benefit of a vehicle. I was sailing down the pavement for about a quarter of a mile, and I slowly skidded to a stop, and I was not dead. You might have guessed that ending already. In fact, I just had a major case of road rash. I was fine in a month. But I destroyed my helmet, and I was 17. It was a real life-changing experience for me. And I've been a fanatic about helmets since then. Now, California is not a free state. This is an interesting wrestling match I have because I'm sort of a libertarian, and I think you should have the right to kill yourself if you want to. In California, it's mandated. You have to wear a helmet or you can't ride a motorcycle. So I don't think much of it. But I was teaching a class, and I think it was in Arizona. And Arizona is a free state where helmets are optional. It was at the time. I don't know if it's still true. And I was talking with this young engineer, and she seemed like clever. She wasn't stupid or anything. And I was talking to her, and she was talking about motorcycles. I said, oh, yeah, I used to ride. And she says, oh, I love to ride, love the wind in my hair. I'm like, wind in your hair? What do you mean you don't wear a helmet? So we're talking about this, and I'm not a fanatic, but I just feel really strongly about this, particularly for kids. I said, because it saved my life, so I've got an opinion. Availability bias. Motorcycles do have accidents, I know. And she says, no. She says, if you wear a helmet, you increase your chances of having an accident. I said, what? She says, yes. It cuts down on your peripheral vision. and you lose auditory cues from the environment. It's a trade-off. It's a conscious choice that I make. I would rather have that additional information and rely on my skills, and she'd been riding motorcycles for several years. I'd rather have that and rely on my skills than have the extra protection. And I couldn't argue with her. I disagreed. I mean, we could talk the merits, but she was working with a different set of assumptions than I was. And what we were talking about was correlated risks. She worried about the increased likelihood of an accident while wearing a helmet, and I worry about the impact of not wearing a helmet. And it turns out when risks are correlated, when solving this risk drives up the risk of something else, that gets really confusing really fast. A lot of people want to throw in the towel. It's like, no, sorry, this is getting too confusing. Just do it. This risk stuff is obviously too confusing. I don't want to go there. We have to deal with that, and we have to recognize talking about correlated risks is going to make some people's eyes cross. Risk management isn't sexy. When my son was 3, in preschool, they had a parent night. And they asked all the 3-year-olds what they wanted to be when they grew up. And I sort of hoped my son would say that he wanted to be an airborne ranger like his dad, or maybe a software geek like his dad. My 3-year-old son, Alex, wanted to be a fire truck. Creative young man, you got to give him credit for that. But no, risk management isn't sexy. Who do you want to be? The fireman or the fire inspector? Who saves more lives? Think about this. Fireman has an axe and a hose and heavy-duty gear, runs into a burning building. Man, we need people that brave and that stupid. That's the first person I want to see if my house catches fire, is some studly young man or woman with an axe busting down the door to haul my sorry butt out of the house before it burns down. I absolutely want to see them in a crisis. Who saves more lives? Fire inspector, what's he do? His weapon is a clipboard and tickets. You know, it's unusual. If you think about this, you'll catch some of this from the international news. It's extremely unusual in North America for there to be a nightclub fire that kills a lot of humans. Because if you chain the exit shut in North America, the fire inspector will get you. That's their job. They go around with the really boring job of saying, what are the risks? Let's eliminate them. Now, think about that. When you say, hey guys, let's go do some risk management. And these guys, hey man, I just came back from a Better Software Conference. I got all this Agile junk I want to try out. There's new requirements stuff. There's this new testing stuff people are talking about. I want to do all this cool risk management. Come on. We'll burn those bridges when we get to them. Right? Well, it's one of the uphill battles. Risk management, not terribly sexy. One of the things we have to wrestle with is subjective probability. This was a major gear grinding in my brain when I tried to change gears into really getting into risk, because I was a geek. I like math, and I really like statistics. How many poker players we got in here? Awesome. See me after. This will be good fun. We learn about statistics from rolling dice. We learn about statistics from playing cards. We learn about statistics from saying, oh, there's 3 hearts on the board. I've got 2 hearts. That's 5. There's only 13 in the deck. There's only 8 hearts left to pull. And we can commit arithmetic and figure out how likely those things are to happen. And that works great in those nice, tidy, closed systems where we all learn statistics. What is the probability that it's going to rain in Las Vegas on January 1st of 2011? Yeah, we can pull numbers out of our shorts. Where can we go for that data? We could go back to history data. Where else could we go? We could ask the locals, right? We could go back maybe old newspapers. We get out the Farmer's Almanac. We could talk with the guys in the National Weather Service. They would all give us some non-zero probability. It does actually rain here. If you're not from around here, you wouldn't know that in June. Which of them is going to be right? None of them. They're all going to be approximations. Here's where we run into trouble. Subjective probability is there's not a right answer. If you pull one card from a shuffled deck and nobody's cheating, there's a 1 in 52 chance you're going to pull the ace of spades. I can prove that to you mathematically. I can't I mean, if you said it was 0.001 and you said it was 0.002, in the real world, in a risk session, we have to say, well, it's helpful to have a guess. What's informing your guess? What's informing your guess? Maybe we say you're smarter than you, we're going to use yours. Maybe we say you're equally smart, we're going to split the difference. Maybe we get a Monte Carlo simulation and say, let's figure out how much we care about this. But the bottom line is the fact that people can argue about probabilities in the future, and you can always argue about probabilities in the future, makes it look like we're making crap up on the spot. And I'm hoping you've got better processes than that, but if it looks like you're pulling numbers out of your shorts, it can make it hard for people to feel like the process is credible. And by the way, sometimes you're going to be wrong, which can make it seem like hard to think about the process being credible. This slide for you guys non-risk geeks is probably the most important thing that I'm going to say. Well, this or maybe one of the next ones. I want you to imagine a continuum. Way off at one side, we have no process at all, and way off at the other side, we have way too much process. You can understand that continuum, right? Whether it's a risk process or review process or testing methodology. Okay, so we would agree, most of us probably, you're at a conference talking about process. I'm going to think probably very few of you would say no process is the right answer. You're at the conference, but no one here looks really stupid. I think too much process, we can agree there is such thing as too much process. When you start writing the standard for which way you're supposed to turn the crank on a pencil sharpener to get a sharp pencil, you've gone too far. So what we're really looking for is kind of the Goldilocks place in the middle that's just right for us. So let's turn it into a gas gauge. And I want you to imagine you choose the process based on your experience, based on the projects you've worked on, based on the books you've read, based on smart people you've talked to. You choose the perfect balance point for your organization, for your project. All right, I need everybody to stand up. Really, no kidding, stand up, stand up. Look around you, all these nice people. Each of them have a little arrow that's the perfect balance, and each of their arrows is in a different place. Each of those arrows is in a different place. So what you need to know, everybody whose arrow is this side of yours, they're fools and cowboys. Everybody whose arrow is this side of yours are bureaucrats and cowards. Now look around the room one more time and ask yourself, when you look at Dale Emery, would he think of you as a cowboy or a coward? Because everyone's going to have a different place. This is really hard. Reasonable people, like that lady and I, you can sit down now, like that lady and I talking about motorcycle helmets, reasonable people who can walk and chew gum at the same time can have different senses of what's appropriate. It's informed by their experience, and since you all have different experience, that can be a huge source of conflict. So, I want to talk a little bit about the risk ninjas, or the pro-risk ninjas. You know, most of the folks in here are going to talk about how you can do processes more effectively. That's boring. I want to talk about how can we undermine and thwart our risk management efforts. Maybe not. Don't think of this as coaching. Think of this as what you need to look out for, okay? 3 things I want to talk about. First, risk management is a tool of the long view. I love Tim Lister's thing this morning about the tinfoil. Walking in and saying, I'm from the future. I'm from 2010. I need you to take the long view. I was thinking particularly about this memory management module. You need to document it better. It cost me years of my life to understand what you did here. Please, oh please, put some better documentation in there. That's the long view. And you know what? Risk is a tool of the long view, and there's appropriate dynamic tension between the long view and the short view. You know, it's not that all pointy-haired bosses are morons. Some executives are morons. I've met a few. Most of them are trying to do the right thing. And some of them will say, we need to get this by January 1st. And we need to ask whether it's negotiable, understand the business value, and if it's a hard date, we need to be able to throw some cargo overboard or get some additional resources. But if you're going to go out of business, if you don't hit the January 1 date, it's a really, really important date. So it's easy to, you know, someone's saying, well, I'm really worried about maintainability 3 years out. It is not inappropriate for an executive to say, oh, I don't care about that right now. I have a short-term problem, and that's the problem of the long view. That's a natural dynamic tension. We should be having these arguments. We should make sure it's not done blindly. Let's talk about this. This is a picture of the largest hurricane, satellite picture. It's actually a very cool picture. I got it on the web. Largest hurricane ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico. Sustained winds of 185 miles an hour, peak winds 235 miles an hour. If you can't see in the cheap seats, that's Cuba, that's Florida. It almost completely fills the Gulf of Mexico. It's over 500 miles across. That was Hurricane Rita. Hurricane Rita is the forgotten hurricane of 2005. Came ashore 2 weeks after Katrina. The television was showing people pulling bodies out of the water still in New Orleans. They were still having logistic issues getting food and water to people trapped in New Orleans. And the National Weather Service recorded the largest Cat 5 hurricane ever seen in the Gulf of Mexico. What happened in the states, all of the coastal states along the Gulf of Mexico evacuated immediately. It's the largest evacuation in the history of the U.S. People from Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, all pulled back, expecting the worst. Hurricane Rita killed 7 people. 113 were killed in the evacuation. The risk management plan was to pull them back, and some pieces of the plan couldn't be tested until it was implemented, and it turned out the roads in Texas could not handle the volume of traffic. Even though they commandeered ingoing and outgoing traffic, there wasn't enough gasoline, there wasn't enough cars, it was bumper-to-bumper traffic, and pretty much ground to a stop. One of the big losses of life was a bus that caught fire. People died of heart attacks. It was 98 degrees. People lose sight of that. If you haven't been in a hurricane, they're hot storms. 98 degrees and humid, no food, no water. And by the way, the hurricane mostly turned and petered out before it went ashore. We're talking about real costs versus possible benefits. One of the most tragic things from a risk management perspective that I've seen in the last 10 years was the news coverage after the evacuation for Hurricane Rita, where they stuck microphones in the faces of these people who were whining and crying because there was no potties, and they, look, what were these guys thinking? They got us all on the road and the hurricane turned. 10 days earlier, over 1,800 people died in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina came ashore. Hurricane Katrina was a Cat 5 storm before it hit land. It actually downgraded to Cat 3 before it hit New Orleans, but it breached the levee. And New Orleans is like a big bowl. It's below sea level. When it breached the levee, a whole part of the city filled in. Any of you guys ever heard of Hurricane Pam? Who here has heard of Hurricane Pam? Hurricane Pam was a desktop simulation that was done by the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration, the state of Louisiana, and the city of New Orleans in 2004 and 2005. It was a desktop simulation. It was a risk management exercise where they sat in a room and said, what would happen if a big hurricane topped the levees? And the answer was we'd lose 500,000 structures, 1 million people would be displaced, and the biggest problem we'd have is getting people out of town. This simulation was conducted in the winter of 2004-05. They revisited it in the spring of 2005. And the last desktop exercise was conducted about 3 weeks before Katrina hit land. I want you to imagine for a moment, forget you know how this comes out. I want you to have a little bit of compassion. I'm not justifying what these guys did. I'm just trying to empathize a little. I want you to imagine you are the mayor of New Orleans. You have a report in your inbox, still warm from the printer, that says, if the levees are topped by a Cat 3 hurricane, it's going to destroy 500,000 buildings, and it's going to kill a lot of people. And evacuation is going to be the hard piece. And you look on the television, and the National Weather Service is saying 5 days out from you is one of the largest storms we've ever seen. It's a Cat 5, and it appears to be bearing right down on New Orleans. Let's give you a little more background information. The city of New Orleans was on the verge of bankruptcy in 2005. You're the mayor, and you know if you touch that evacuation button, you're going to bankrupt your administration if you touch the button. So you get a handful of your advisors in a room. Say, guys, we got this report here that says, man, a Cat 5 hurricane hitting us is going to be devastating. And the National Weather Service is saying there's a likelihood that this storm, which is right now really serious, is heading straight for us. What should we do? And I want you to imagine one of your advisors says, boss, if you touch that button, you're bankrupt. That's a cost that gets incurred. The hurricane might hit us. Let's wait a couple hours and see what happens. And whether you would make that choice or not, I want you to recognize it would be an attractive choice. It would be attractive to push that decision off just a little bit. You know, it might wreck your day. What if 8 hours later, the hurricane had been downgraded to a Cat 4? There's a velocity for you. Oh, wow, it's down to Cat 4. Maybe it'll just be a thundercloud by the time it gets here. What should we do? Maybe wait just a little longer. And if you're intellectually honest, you have to say, yeah, that would be attractive, whatever I do. And by the way, if you evacuate them and the hurricane turns, they're going to ride you out of town on a rail. It's not that there's contrary forces to risk management. There's just trade-offs. And if we're not really careful about how we communicate stuff, it's a no-win game. If you evacuate and the risk doesn't happen, you're doomed. If you wait to past the last minute, you're doomed too. Cultural taboos. Some organizations, there's things we cannot say, we cannot hear, we cannot see. Think about your organization. Maybe you're cranking along on this project. It's got a critical dependency on this project over here. This project over here, part of your organization, is being run by one of the local darlings. It's got a whole bunch of management support. And what you're hearing in the break room is this dog won't hunt. They are not going to hit their targets. They're having a bunch of errors, a bunch of issues, quality issues coming out of testing. In some organizations, it's not politically correct to say, my looming risk is that your favored project over here might not deliver. Some organizations, you can't say that. Some organizations, we're not supposed to hear that the down economy has people selling our stock and that there's rumors of layoffs that might boost the stock price. We're not supposed to hear that kind of talk. And some places, you're supposed to keep a positive attitude. This is my mother-in-law believes firmly, if you don't talk about bad things, they won't happen. And some of you work in organizations like that. Those cultural taboos, the rules of what we can and can't talk about, can be a huge barrier to effective risk management. Final piece I want to talk about is wolves. I realized when I was about 45 that most of what I'd learned about risk when I was a child, I learned from a couple of different stories about wolves. First was the story of the three little pigs. Now, I believe this is an international story, but in case it's not, there might be three little goats in your part of the world. I want to briefly share with you the story of three little pigs. Three little pigs graduate from high school, go off in the world to seek their fortune. The first one really wants to get on with dancing and lollygagging around, so he grabs some straw, throws together a little hut, and goes off to play. The second one likes what his brother has done, grabs some sticks, throws together a little stick house, and goes off to play. The third little pig, probably a smart sister, goes down to the riverbed with a shovel, digs some clay bricks, builds an oven, fires the bricks, and makes a house out of bricks. And the other pigs cajole and chide their sister, saying, come and play with us, come on, what's the big deal? And the third little pig says, just wait, when the big bad wolf comes, you'll see that I'm right. Big bad wolf comes, everybody runs to their house. Big bad wolf huffs and puffs, blows down the house of straw, eats that little pig. I'm not going to give you the sissy version where it escapes. Eats the little pig, goes to the house of sticks, huffs and puffs, blows it down, eats that little pig, goes to the house of bricks, huffs and puffs and huffs and puffs, and dies of hyperventilation. What's the moral we learn from this? If you invest in risk, you will save the day and obviously be a hero. That's what I learned from that. Investing in risk saves the day. You'll obviously be a hero. Now, imagine the stress that I felt when I learned my second story of little wolves. The boy that cried wolf. The boy's out tending the flock. The village tells him, if you see a wolf, yell for help and we'll come running. He's out in the meadow. Here's a rustling in the bushes. He cries, wolf, wolf. The villagers all rush up, and it turns out it was just a chicken in the weeds, and they say, don't cry wolf unless there's really an emergency, and they go back. And the kid's out tending the sheep, and it's been a few days, and he hears a rustling in the bushes, and he says, "Wolf, wolf," and the villagers all come running, and it turns out it was just a goat clambering up the mountainside, and the villagers say, "Don't cry wolf unless there's really an emergency." And a few days later, the big bad wolf comes, the kid goes, "Wolf, wolf," and the villagers all go, "We've heard this before." The wolf eats the kid and all the sheep, and decimates the village, just because there ought to be some justice to the world. What we learn there is don't cry wolf. Don't cry wolf. Wait a second. Careful, this is like the big finish. You'll hate this. It's true, and you're going to hate it. We're talking about risk management. When we're doing risk management, we're going to get a bunch of folks in a room. We're going to say, all right, let's identify bad stuff that might happen, and some of them we're going to take action to reduce the likelihood or reduce the violence. Subsequently, if the risk occurs, you are a smart little pig. You invested, the risk happened, and you mitigated it. It doesn't get any better from here, folks. It's downhill from here. What if you identify the risk and manage it, and then it doesn't materialize? You cried wolf. You evacuated Houston. You spent all that money. You inconvenienced all those people. People kept quoting the statistic. 7 people died in the hurricane, and 113 died in the evacuation. Isn't that a tragedy? Wait a minute. What about the 1,800 that died when they didn't evacuate? Do we forget that, or what's the deal? What if you identify a risk and you choose not to manage it? If it happens and it does violence, risk management didn't help. We spent all that time talking about risks. We talked about this one. You chose not to try to mitigate it, and it happened, and it did violence. Why are we spending this time and energy on risk management? And if it doesn't happen, I still don't understand why we spend all this time on risk management. That's kind of a coin toss. Well, we talked about this might happen. We decided not to mitigate it, and it didn't happen. It's like, well, either yay, you decided not to invest in it, and it didn't happen, or why did we bother? If we hadn't talked about this, we wouldn't have mitigated it, and it wouldn't have happened, so. What if you don't identify a risk, and it happens? Risk management didn't help. And if you don't identify it doesn't happen, no one ever knows. So there's 5 scenarios that are visible. One of them you look like a hero. One of them's ambiguous. And the other 3 you look like a goat. I actually gave a part of this talk with a bunch of my hooligan friends at consultants camp. I said, I'm really trying to find a way to draw this picture, but I'm stuck. And several people, Graham Oakes, Dale, I think Graham had the crayons, were arguing with me in this basement. And Graham walked over. He says, no. Here's what you got. This is a system of effects. It's a simple structure. It's real powerful, you my systems theory friends. This is something we would say is measurable, the frequency and severity of risk events. Let me simplify for you. Pain. That box represents pain. When people are in pain, an arrow like that says more pain equals more perceived value. If you're in pain, aspirin is valuable. All right? We might assume in a competent organization that if there's a perceived value of risk management, that might lead to an increased investment in risk management. They're not going to invest if they don't see the value. And they're going to see the value when they're in pain. And if you're in a competent organization, we might imagine an increased investment leads to more effective risk management processes. Everybody with me so far? It's going to get really scary in just a second. So let's imagine we are now doing a little better job of effectively managing risk. The only other wrinkle I'm going to throw in here is that kind of a line. That says, more of this makes for less of that. It's an inversion for my software geek friends. So yes, if we are more effective at risk management, we're going to have less pain. But this is a system. If we have less pain, we're going to have less perceived value. And if we have less perceived value, we're going to have less investment. And if we have less investment, we have less effective risk management, which leads to more pain. Wait a minute. What we have here is a cycle. It's an oscillating cycle. Remember that picture we started with? Practices build, and then decay. And then they build and decay. What's causing it, I think, is this cycle. And what we need to do is find a way to break the cycle, which is the only salve I have for the wounds that I've just inflicted on you. Here's what I think needs to happen. We need to advocate for risk management. We need to improve and increase organizational awareness. But we need to do it at a specific time. We need to do it when we're being effective. When risk management is decreasing the pain, we need to ratchet up how much we are trying to keep organizational awareness of the value of the process. By the way, this doesn't have to be about risk. This can be about any process you're trying to advocate. As the process starts to be more effective, you need to redouble your efforts, because when the initial successes happen, people will forget. I read a risk management book. I'm trying to remember if it was Waltzing with Bears. Was that the novelette? Was Waltzing with Bears the novel telling the story? And at the end, they said, we can cut out all the QA processes because everybody's got, now it's in their DNA. I was like, and my question is always, I'm more and more finding a clever question is, what do you think happened next? Because they talk about, in the last 3 weeks, we got an efficiency because we cut out all that QA process and didn't tell anybody, and they were all doing this really great work. And I thought, what do you think happened next? I think what happened next is quality probably went, but it solved that problem for that project. I'm not throwing rocks at Tim. We need to work on that organizational awareness to try to stabilize this. So now comes the one slide of what are my ideas about stabilizing, and most of it's going to be a booster shot because it's stuff that you'll know. First 3 things have to do with executives. From a risk management perspective, you don't want to let the executives get too far divorced from risk management. They need to be involved. They need to understand what risk management is, what it can do for them, and what it can't. Fire insurance doesn't stop your house from burning down. It decreases the violence. It decreases the impact. And executives need to understand that. They need to stay involved in the process. There are decisions that need to be made in terms of risk management on non-trivial projects that absolutely require input from the executive suite. Project managers, senior team leaders, risk managers, you get paid to explain the decisions, not always to make them. You're supposed to inform good decisions. We need to make sure the executives don't slough off their responsibility to make the hard call. And when we build our big, hideous list of risks and we try to figure out what's the price tag, the non-trivial price tag for solving these problems, and we're going to draw a line and say we're going to solve the problems above this line, and the problems below this line are acceptable risks, an executive should have the crayon in their hand when the line gets drawn. And it's a decision that should be revisited from time to time. I heard, this is not intended to be political, I just can't help bringing it up in this talk. I heard some moron in Congress, some congressman in the United States in the last 3 days, I saw the headline, I actually don't remember who said it, said, we need to keep doing offshore drilling. We've had all these different wells and nothing's gone wrong except once. Wait, I'm sorry, no context to set in for this guy in the last 6 weeks. Stunning to me. It's like, wait, you're not one of the executives, are you? No, you get to vote, but okay. Let's get some smarter people in the room and talk about, well, is this like a black swan, or is this something that, because how many wells do we have at this depth? Anybody know? I think it's in the 30s. I think it's like 30 or 35 wells in the world are this deep. So this is not even a 1 in 100 shot. This is a 1 in 30 shot based on the available historical data so far. What else? My process improvement friends, slow down. This is a real challenge, particularly if you get brought in as a consultant or you get promoted and we say, wait a minute, you turned around. Done. We need test-driven development, dude. We aren't doing it. I want to do it. You are now the crown prince of test-driven development. Everything we're doing is wrong. I want you to go in and fix these guys. It's like, dude, be very careful about what you sign up for. What you want to do is slow and deliberate steps. Here's why. Whenever you make a change, you're introducing some violence and some chaos. Things are going to slow down a little bit. And if you try to change too much, people will tip over. And to change too much, you have to oversell. And if you have to oversell, you're doomed. You set these expectations that can't be met on the planet Earth. You try to do too much too fast. And now, not only do you not become effective and undermine your future, but you inoculate the organization against future change. Slow and deliberate steps. I think this is one of the things that my consulting clients love about me, is they'll bring in 2 or 3 consultants to solve a problem, and I'm timid isn't the right word. I'm just kind of cautious. It's like, Well, why don't we try one little thing and see what happens? Get a little step closer, and we won't do anything so big that if you hate it, we can't undo it. And I end up building more credibility. The guys come in, no problem. We got our kit bag here, and we can change everything you know about the universe in 6 months. Slow, deliberate steps. Don't oversell. This is hard. Don believes in test-driven development. Yay. Don't oversell it. What you need to say is it's going to be a slight improvement. In fact, I think I heard a talk from Jerry Weinberg where he said, never promise more than 10% improvement. If they get more, don't let them see. Don't oversell. What happens? Sometimes your risk management efforts are going to fail. And you need to take those in stride. You need to set expectations. I didn't say we're not going to have any problems on this project. We should have fewer problems, and some of them will have padding in the right places that it's not incapacitating. And finally, this is kind of part and parcel, but I wanted to call it out as a separate piece. Take credit for the wins. Some of you guys are brilliant, shy, introverted people. And if we said, I want you to make you the test-driven development guru, and you implemented in little pieces and you had some victories, you'd keep the metrics to yourself. It's like, hey, we're having victories, but I'll save this in reserve. It's like, no. You want to make sure that people see that there's value. That's part of selling the benefits. That helps keep people enthusiastic about it. But you also, when you miss something, what you need to do is circle back around and say, you know what, these risks happened, and I've looked at retrospectives. This risk has happened to us before. We need to add it to our process to look out for this. We didn't think it was as common as it's turning out to be. That helps executives see that it's a messy process, like life. Good things can happen and bad things can happen. That helps to build a sustainable momentum. And sustainability is really what I want to talk about. That system diagram, when we cranked that out, I modified it slightly, but we cranked that out, it was like, oh no, this is like way too true. I'm hoping that you saw that too. I walked you through, oh, okay, yeah, we get it. Why are we still listening to this guy, right? We need to figure out how can we make our efforts sustainable, because we got to make them sustainable and then do minor incremental improvements. If we're up and down, we're doomed. So what I want to do now is throw it open to Stump the Chump in case any of the things I said didn't make sense or were confusing or prompted questions from you guys. Ooh, there's the lovely Vanna White person with the microphone and everything. Sir. Up, he's doing magic over there.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned was about taboos that make it hard to do risk management.
Yes.
How do you go about discovering those taboos in an organization or culture?
As a consultant, when I come in, what I find is I'll ask questions, and when people cringe, look away, or take me aside and say we shouldn't talk about that, that's a hint. What I can tell you is some taboos, people don't talk about clients they've just lost. Some organizations don't like to talk about projects that have failed. In a lot of organizations, people finish a project, it's like a cat leaving a cat box. It didn't go as well as we're going to tell everybody, and if it didn't go well, we want to bury the evidence. And so I'll ask questions about history, and people look at their sneakers and not talk. History is a common taboo. Projects in the commercial world, we just lost a big customer because of problem X. Sometimes you're not allowed to talk about problem X or losing that customer. Typically what I'll do is I'll find people come to me with the taboos because I'll talk about a subject I'm not supposed to talk about. One of the classics is I do a lot of work in the public sector in California. The legislature in California has signed the budget on time twice in 30 years. When they don't sign the budget on time, all projects lose the ability to sign any checks until the budget is signed. They can't close any contracts until the budget is signed. This is typically a 4 to 12 week delay. So I want you to imagine you're working on your $40 million project, but you're not allowed to spend money in July or August. But you have to pretend that you can. That's one of the taboos. You say, okay, well, what's your strategy if the legislature doesn't sign the budget on time? And often the projects, I actually asked this question about 2 weeks ago in a group of people, and about a third of the group said, yeah, we actually put that in our risk plan. And the other guys went, no, we don't want to make the legislature look bad if they review us. It's like, if I was a legislator, I'd think you were bad for not having it. But I look for those kind of examples. And people typically will come to me and tell me what the taboos are. If you're there, you probably know them. But if you're a visitor, that's a way to find them. Other questions? I can't see out there. I saw Tim Lister doing this. Oh, there's one over there.
So that was an excellent talk on risk management. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Like industries like Boeing or BP right now, do they do some kind of best practice analysis of risk management or things like that that you are aware of?
If you're a real risk geek, there was a wonderful book written last year called The Flaw of Averages. The Flaw of Averages. If you're a risk geek or a math fan, you'll really like this book. It turns out a lot of the really, really hard, cool stuff that's going on in risk management is happening in the oil industry. I don't know about BP in particular. No, for the last 20 years. Here, so let me give you a glimpse of the geekdom. You know, this probability of future events is really hard to think through. One of the very, very cool tools that's just now hitting desktops, last 5 years, is risk management simulations. So you can take things, like imagine you took a schedule, and you say, all right, everybody, I want you to give me your best guess at the estimates for these hunks of stuff. And I don't want you to give it to me as a point. Give me a credible range, right? With a running start and favorable winds, this might take 2 weeks. Normally it'd take about 4, worst case, 8. And instead of taking those 3 different numbers or averaging them, imagine that you put a curve for those estimates and then ran a Monte Carlo simulation. So you do the project, have the computer do the project 100 times, and when it comes time for that task, they roll the dice and under the curve plot the value, and then said, okay, hey, I did the project 100 times. And you didn't know it, but your critical path isn't there, it's up here. A whole bunch of that work in simulation comes from the oil industry. If you go to flawofaverages.com, I don't think you have to own the book to be able to play on the site. They've got some models for like balancing a portfolio. That's the other place where this has happened. Ironically enough, is the financial industry. Balancing a portfolio. If you own stock, there's an advantage to you of holding oil stock and airline stock because there's an inverse correlation. When oil stocks go up, it's usually because oil prices are going up. When oil prices go up, airline stock goes down because fuel costs are one of their major costs. When airline stocks are going up and they're being profitable, typically it's because oil prices are going down. So if you want to decrease the volatility of your portfolio, you get a mix of the two. And the financial industry and the oil industry, balancing portfolios of oil wells and things like that, are doing some of the most interesting risk management stuff I've been able to find. Just apparently not in the construction part of drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. If there's anyone from BP who knows different, beat me up on the side and I'll take it all back. Other questions? Listen, it was great fun playing with you. I'm happy to talk about risk geek stuff at any time. You can shoot me an email. You can track me down because I'll be at the conference for the whole duration. Thank you very much.